My mother did her best to raise my sister and me to be little ladies. Growing up, we had the best of ballet lessons, piano lessons, and in the summer, we even went to sewing class where we could learn to design and make our own clothing. Unfortunately, as much as I enjoyed extracurricular activities, my scholastic history was not so bright. And by the time I got to high school, I was far more concerned about maintaining my social status and looking at boys to give much consideration to my academics. This is why it must have come as a complete and total surprise when the summer between my junior and senior year, I applied for and got accepted to a summer geology program. This was an elite group of only 16 students plucked from a school of more than 2,000 candidates. Together we would spend the next 3 weeks driving all around Pennsylvania, visiting coal mines, running through caves, collecting rock samples, polishing rocks, weighing rocks, and getting very dirty. As if that wasn't fun enough, after the first 3 weeks, our 4 chaperones loaded the 16 of us, 8 boys and 8 girls, all of our gear, and into 2 rental white vans to embark on a trip that would take us all the way out to the Black Hills, Craters of the Moon, the Badlands, even Yellowstone National Park. This was to be my first camping experience. Prior to this moment, my mother's idea of roughing it was staying at any hotel that didn't put a chocolate on our pillow as part of the turn-down service. To say I was in for an adventure puts it very mildly. The first night we stopped in somewhere in Michigan, and we set up camp for the very first time. Working together as teams, we set up all the tents, we arranged our cooking area, and we ate our first meal together. Not long after cleanup had concluded, it began to rain. But we were tired from embarking on our adventure, so we retired to the tents, thinking it would be cozy, very much like a slumber party. Unfortunately, those tents had been used for several prior trips and had lost their waterproofing. So the cozy environment that we had imagined quickly became a cold and soggy mess. And inside the tent, we were miserable. After tossing and turning, hemming and hawing, and frankly complaining, we finally started discussing alternatives and decided, you know, only a few feet away, there are those warm and cozy vans with cushy seats. Maybe we should go sleep there for the night. We discussed it amongst ourselves and decided that was our best course of action, and we quickly gathered all of our items together, and as we started to unzip the flap, we had a second thought. But what is going to happen when those boys find us in the van, having not even been able to survive one night in our tents? We will never live this down. So we considered that, and we thought, you know what, we would rather survive the night than live in comfort, and so we stuck it out in our soggy, leaking tent. The next morning, the sun came up and the air was fresh and clean. And as we unzipped the flap to our tent and headed over to the vans, we found the boys inside. They were eating candy and playing cards. And they looked at us and they said, "Don't you have any common sense than to come in out of the rain?" I learned a lesson that day, to be more concerned about my own sense than to worry what someone else is going to say about me. But that wasn't the only lesson that I learned on this trip. A while later, we were in some heavily wooded campground, and one of the boys decided to play a prank on us to see how afraid or how serious about camping we really were. And all of a sudden, he approached the group of us with a huge lizard, and he jabbed it at us. And amidst all of the squeals, "Ee!" and the girls running away, I suddenly realized I wasn't afraid. That squeal died in my throat, and instead I was looking at this giant lizard and thinking how much I wanted to touch its scaly skin. Where did this thought come from? And why did I feel compelled to start squealing when I wasn't even afraid at all? And that's when I realized that I had been reacting to other people's expectations of my behavior my whole life. And maybe it was time for me to start focusing on my own interests and not other people's expectations of me. Wow. So then we got to the most fearsome part of the trip for me. You see, I had been harboring a secret. While we were in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, we had a downriver whitewater rafting experience. And I couldn't swim. And I didn't want to tell anyone. So, with the rest of my fellow students, I stood in line, and I got my paddle and my life jacket, and I hooked all the snaps, and I pulled everything tight, and I got on that raft. Now, when we started off, there was a bunch of us in the raft and then this crazy river guide. And he decided to warm us up that he would teach us a song. So I'm sitting there, and now I'm trying to decide which is scarier, whitewater rafting or singing in public. I sang. And then also he taught us what he called the water ballet, where we would take our paddles and we would lift them up in unison, and then tap the water in unison, and then twirl them around in unison, and oh, everyone hold on, the rapids are ahead. And so we started with the adventure, and I went down the whole time squealing, for real. But once we got to the calmer parts, I opened my eyes and I looked around and I realized this was a truly beautiful part of the country. And had I allowed my fear to get the better of me, I would never have had the opportunity to have this great experience. That was the first of many subsequent whitewater rafting experiences that I will go on. So eventually this 3-week trip did come to an end. We arrived back home safely, and soon I was going to be starting my senior year in high school. But I realized things were very different with me at the start of the new school year than they were at the end of the prior school year. You see, I had learned a few things along the way. I actually enrolled in a 5th science course. I only needed 3 to graduate, but I decided to follow my interest and took physics. And not just physics. I was the only girl in the honors physics course. I decided I wasn't afraid about what people would say about me. I wanted to learn. Later, I would go off to college, and unfortunately I would disappoint my mother, my aunt, and my grandmother. You see, I opted not to rush their sorority, and instead, I joined Outdoor Adventure Club, where in addition to whitewater rafting and camping, I also engaged in hiking and kayaking and so much more. Turns out I'm pretty crazy with a paintball gun. Only a couple of years ago, I ended up getting a new roommate. I've never actually had a lizard as a roommate, but on this particular day, I was heading out for work and I noticed a small, round-bodied, 8-legged creature. It was a very shiny black abdomen with that little red hourglass on it. And I decided I wasn't going to squeal and be afraid, and instead, I made Fluffy feel welcome for the few hours that she was with me until the Orchid Man came. As it turns out, I learned a lot that summer, and some of it was even about rocks.